Hello, how are you today? It's a gorgeous, gorgeous day. Are you almost ready to forward your manuscript to your editor? There's one more thing that you can do for it. You can review it one more time using the checklist today's guest will share with us. There are only 4 items on it, but it's going to help you so much, and you'll be able to use it from now on. Tell you more about that in just a few minutes. Hi, I'm Patricia Durkin, and this is Marketers on a Mission. We present marketing tutorials and interviews to help Christian writers and speakers take their message online. This is episode number 128, How to Fine-Tune Your Manuscript Before Submitting It to Your Editor, with guest author Michelle Ewell. Hello, Michelle. How are you today?
Very well, thanks. Happy to be here.
You're an interview pro. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. You say that God's will is best seen in reverse. Now, I can figure that out for myself, but what's your motive to say that? What's that background of that story?
Well, the idea for that comes from the fact that so often we cannot see how God works until we see him after it works. You know, faith is the appearance of things hoped for, the things that are unseen. And so we are working to walk in the ways that God has put before us, but a lot of times it makes no sense at all. Today, while I'm talking to you, September 12th, OC and My Utmost for His Highest is talking about that very thing, that you just have to go where God calls you and expect that he will give you the answer later, but not right now.
And he helps us make peace with that, because naturally we don't have peace with that.
No, we want to ask questions. Hey, but today's reading actually addressed that and said, you just need to, he'll justify. He actually used that word. God will justify what he did later. And it's just like, well, how much later will it be? And you'll have to figure it out and wait.
Might not even be in this lifetime.
Exactly. And that's probably the hardest thing to put into place, that, you know, God is at work and I may never see the answer, but we know it's good because he is good.
And that's all dependent upon our relationship with him in the first place, isn't it?
Amen. Yes, it is. Yes. Oswald Chambers talks about that a lot. I write an utmost response to every day's My Utmost for His Highest on my Michelle Writer Facebook page, because so many people have said to me, I like My Utmost for His Highest, but I don't always understand it. Completely understandable response. And so for the last year, the Holy Spirit laid upon me that I should just tell him what I think it says. And so I've been doing that, and oh my word, it's my faith has changed. I'm strengthened, and I've been reading My Utmost for His Highest for 20 years, and I even wrote a book about it. So it's not the word of God, of course, but it is taken completely out of the word of God. And so God can use it in wonderful ways. Someone wrote to me this morning and just said, I'm thankful that you wrote that, because I'm right there today. And it was really helpful. So that's a blessing. I am blessed. And if other people are blessed, amen, I'll take it.
Yes. What I'd like to do is talk about your life a little bit. Then we'll talk very quickly about your speaking, then writing. Then we'll go directly to the latest, the upcoming release, which is just right there. Then we'll have that marketing element. You're going to tell us about those 4 points in the checklist. Is that all right?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay.
All of it. I can talk about anything. I'm Italian.
In 2002, you and your family visited New Zealand's Auckland War Museum. Now, there was something that you said about that just sent chills down my spine, Michelle. I like history, so I'm familiar with, from an observer point, someone who watches documentaries, I'm familiar with the concept of trench warfare. Well, you said that you saw a replica of a trench warfare environment. Did that just pierce your heart?
It was very sobering, because we don't really think about we always talk about, you're in the trenches, but what does that really mean? And during the First World War, it meant that you were under the ground and you were in the mud, and there were rats and there was water, and it was awful. My family was in New Zealand camping for a couple of weeks, and we went to the Auckland Museum. They have a wonderful memorial to their soldiers who served during World War I. New Zealand had the highest casualty rate of any army. 58% of the men they sent were injured or killed during the Great War. They sent 100,000 men, and 58% were somehow injured. So that was very sobering. Then down in the basement, appropriately, they had a mock of the trenches. Exhibits like those trenches are also available in Indianapolis. You can see them at the British War Museum in London. I've been in them in a couple of places, and my husband and I actually toured the Somme, where we saw the actual sites of the trenches. It was such a romantic interlude. I said to my husband, let's go to Paris for the night. He said, great. And I said, and then we can go to the Somme. If you're related to a writer, you may know that they take you to places you don't expect to go, and they're not always very nice. He, however, was wearing a trench coat. I was not. So the officer, my husband's a Navy commander, was in far better care than I was at the trenches. But the other thing that came of that New Zealand trip, which affected this latest book of Poppy and Remembrance, is everywhere we went, we saw monuments to soldiers who had died during the First World War. One was particularly poignant. He was in his kit. He had his backpack, his rifle, his hat, and he was looking out to the east in New Zealand towards where he had died. And that was just so sobering and a reminder that people suffer more than we know. And so when I wrote this book of Poppy and Remembrance, I needed a colonial hero, and I honored New Zealand in that way. They made a great sacrifice for many people in the Great War.
And rarely discussed, isn't it?
Yes.
Rarely shared.
We just don't know. I mean, 58% casualty rate. I had no idea until I was actually doing research. And that's an enormous, I mean, they didn't all die. Casualty means you're injured or you die, but you're taken out of the battle lineup for at least a part of the time. And that's a lot of people.
We're going to talk about more in depth in A Poppy in Remembrance, but you've already tweaked our interest now, so show us that beautiful book cover, please.
This is the only cover available right now because it's not quite, this is the proof copy. It will be out in November in time to meet the centenary of the end of the war. It's a glorious cover. I like to think it's a great book. And it includes not just that New Zealand soldier, but Oswald and Biddy Chambers as what are called marquee characters. So I'm adding to my repertoire about Oswald and Biddy, but this is not a fiction. This is a novel.
You're trained as a reporter. You're a Navy wife who moved multiple times, a genealogist, an essayist, a biographer, an author of both fiction and nonfiction. You're detail-oriented, organized woman, aren't you?
Most days, yes. I had to be.
Yes, absolutely. And what I am struck by is that God gave you gifts to fulfill the call that He had on your life. In order to fill all those roles, you have to be organized, and you have to understand, not only gather details, but know which ones are the important ones, don't you?
It's true, but just as you say that, I think about how in my early years when I was so frustrated with small children and a husband continually out to sea and a house always breaking down and not having time to write, I used to think, what has happened to my life? And yet that was what I needed to do during that period of time in my life. Had I been up in a garret, if I even had one, writing, my children would have had no parent. And that was not what God called us to do. And it's interesting how He leads us along in different ways. I ended up as a journalist because I knew I wasn't writing in college, and so I went down and applied for the job. And that time at the Daily Bruin at UCLA was probably the most significant aspect of my college degree. Not the English literature, but learning how to put words on paper, how to meet a deadline, how to work with an editor, how to own up to the fact I had made some mistakes. Those were all part of growing up, and they were very important. And they come out in A Poppy in Remembrance, where we have a young woman who wants to be a reporter. And I, unfortunately, had plenty of opportunity to use some of my errors in this novel. But who could have guessed that all those years ago? And, becoming a genealogist had to do with family history and family of origin issues. But that work, having to specifically detail where I got the information I got, was very important in being able to write Mrs. Oswald Chambers. A biography of Biddy Chambers. I used Ancestry.com for a lot of my research, which I had never done before. I was a purist genealogist before the internet. But Ancestry really provided me with wonderful opportunities, including opportunities to meet relatives of the friends of Biddy and Oswald Chambers. My universe expanded so much as an opportunity to meet Jimmy Hansen's grandson and Gladys Donathorne's daughter. And then, of course, Eva Spink-Pulford's son. Just wonderful. And then all of that reading I read constantly, and all those newsletters I wrote for, scouts and for women's groups and so forth, all played a part in my ability to be a professional writer now. And I think it's important to note that I got my first contract that very day we took our last child to college. I mean, There was such a wonderful blessing in that, because now on this side of it, I've been a professional writer for 8 years. This side of it, I could not have managed managing all those children in volleyball games and sports and so forth at the same time. But when my daughter left or went, that opened up a tremendous amount of time and opportunity that I could spend on the writing and the marketing end, which has been very important.
Mm. So for everyone who's watching live or on the replay, if you have got this passion in your spirit and you know it's from God, but things are not coming together, don't give up. It just means it's not your time yet. That doesn't mean it's never going to happen, because it hasn't happened so far does not mean it will never happen. If he has gifted you and called you, find contentment the best you can. Wait for him.
This is totally true, and it just goes right along with what you said earlier and what Oswald Chambers was saying today. My first time, I love it when that happens, and it happens all the
time. Let's see. Now you speak, of course. You write more than you speak. You're much heavier on the writing, aren't you?
Absolutely. I just 2 weeks ago was speaking in Redwood Valley, where I talked about Biddy Chambers and resilience. Redwood Valley lost 400 homes in the fires. I live in Northern California, where we've had terrible fires for the last year, really. And I was going up to speak to this wonderful church, and I patterned my PowerPoint and my conversation as to how God uses trials in our lives to his glory, using Biddy's life as an example. I spent a couple of weeks in Virginia this summer talking about Oswald and Biddy as well. My utmost for his highest. There's such richness in the stories and in also, of course, the words, that it's a pleasure. It's an honor, really, to be able to talk about them and to show the pictures and tell the stories. It's wonderful. It's a great life.
This is not a simple book that you wrote and then you wrote another one and you're just going to put it down and walk away. This has changed your life, hasn't it?
It really has. I just went to work one day and my whole life changed. And it wasn't just me. It was my husband, my family, my church, my friends, and anybody who's read Mrs. Oswald Chambers. I actually work for a literary agency, and on that very day, we had agreed, I had written 4 novellas the year before, and we had agreed that day at the end of the workday, we were going to talk about what I should write next. Before that even happened, at 11 o'clock, my agent got a phone call from New York, an editor looking for someone who would write a novel, an inspirational historical fiction, well, that's a novel, that took place the day the war started, World War I, and ended the day World War I ended, November 11, 1918. That was the armistice. So we stood around talking about what a crazy idea that was. I mean, where would you get an inspirational story out of that? And my grandfather didn't have the right kind of story from the war. And but we started talking about Wings and Lawrence of Arabia and Snoopy and the Red Baron, because we live in Sonoma County. And I said, well, but then there's the Oswald Chambers story. She said, what Oswald Chambers story? And I said, well, he ran a revival among the troops, the Anzac troops during World War I. And she said, can you write it? There's only one answer to the question when your agent says that to you. Sure. And I went right to work. I had trouble for a couple of days, and then I was praying. I said, Lord, I'm willing to write this book, but you're going to have to give me the story because I haven't got anything. And I only had 4 days to come up with the proposal. So I was working fast. And right then, I had the first scene. And I got up and wrote the first scene. Then I went out and walked my dog with my prayer partner, and we prayed. And I came up with sort of a story. Got the second scene, wrote the second scene. And then I printed out an outline of the war, and then I wrote out an outline of Oswald Chambers' life during the war, and I put a piece of paper down the middle, and I put them all on my kitchen island, and I cross-referenced for 4, 5, 6 hours. I'm a long time. I was exhausted at the end of that, but I had the 50 chapters. I had 50 paragraphs, 50 chapters, and that became this book. I was telling Patricia earlier, so many phenomenal things happened in the writing of both A Poppy in Remembrance and Mrs. Oswald Chambers, that my life is so much better as a result. I'm totally blessed and blown away, really, by the things that God did as part of writing the book. We have Mrs. Oswald Chambers because I was writing Poppy, and Biddy kept changing my storyline. She kept altering things, which is not unusual when you're writing a novel. I mean, that happens all the time, but this was just bizarre. And then, again, through another series of unusual events, I had an opportunity to meet a member of the Oswald Chambers Publication Association in Scotland. And I said, the first thing I said to him was, gosh, have you guys thought about writing a biography of Biddy? Because she's really an unusual and strong character. And he laughed and said, no, but maybe you're the person to write it. And I laughed right back because I was writing a novel. But that's exactly what did happen is I finished my draft on the novel and I wrote a biography of Biddy Chambers, which was published last year, Mrs. Oswald Chambers.
Now, yes, and describe to us, I know the answer, but describe to us how Mrs. Oswald Chambers' name is Biddy. That's not her Christian name.
No, her original name was Gertrude Annie Hobbs. She was on a boat where she got to become well acquainted with Oswald Chambers. They fell in love on this boat. And he had a sister named Gertrude, and Oswald liked to give people nicknames, and it was getting too confusing, pretty girl, Gertrude, sister Gertrude. So he said, why don't I give you a nickname? How about beloved disciple? What's she going to say to that? So she said, sure. But that became a little, problematic. Oh, beloved disciple, should we walk around the deck? Oh, beloved disciple, how about some tea? So he shortened it to BD, which morphed into Biddy, and that's who she was for the rest of her life.
Let me check Facebook. I think we have some questions and comments. Let's look over here. Janice Hall Hex says, hey, Michelle. Hey, Patricia. It's good to see you, Janice. Ethel Lighton, she, Ethel, you need to tell me one day if I'm pronouncing your name right, because I definitely want to. She's here with us, Janet McHenry.
Hey,
it's good to see everybody. There we are. Good. And they only, the Chambers, the real life Chambers, and not the novel that we're going to talk about in a little bit. They had such a short period of time together. It was just 7 years. Is that right?
A 7-year marriage. He died. That's what happened. Funny at all. He died.
He was a dynamic man. She was a dynamic woman. And once again, going back to the gifts, when they got together, she was already a very experienced stenographer, and he was a very experienced speaker, and they melded those gifts together, didn't they?
Absolutely, and that's where we have My Utmost for His Highest and 29 other books. She took notes of everything he said in shorthand. He actually never saw any books published. She did them all compilations from his writing, and there we are. Yeah. And
he passed in, was it Egypt?
He died in Egypt in 1917, before the end of the war, yes.
From appendicitis. So he
pretty much so. I mean, it was after effects, but yes.
He contracted an illness. She went on and led a very, very full life, didn't she?
She did. It was focused on taking the calling God had given her to turn Oswald's words into books. She lived in poverty to be able to do that, but she did. And then eventually, My Utmost for His Highest, which did very well from the start. It's never been out of print in 91 years. She had adventures. Her house was nearly bombed during the Blitz. Her daughter, Kathleen, grew up to become a nurse. She was nearly killed several times during the Blitz. And it's a wonderful story of a life that's lived to God's glory, despite where he took her and what he did with her life. She truly did live her utmost for his highest.
It's a popular concept nowadays that if you obey, life is going to be a bed of roses. That's not historically accurate or biblically accurate, is it?
Well, it depends, but generally speaking, God will take you through challenges for your good. I mean, that's what My Most for His Highest the last couple of days has been talking about, is that he puts us in circumstances where he can show himself in those circumstances. And he also puts us in those smaller circumstances, if you will, to build up our muscles of faith so that when the really big thing comes, you can go through it better, perhaps.
Okay.
If I hadn't been walking with the Lord when my house came close to burning down here last year, it didn't, 5 blocks. I might not have been as whatever I was at the time. Well, I mean, it was in the middle of my book launch. I grabbed my book, I grabbed my suit that I spoke with and I wore when I went to Wheaton and went out the door. And the last Zoom interview I did, I was wearing the gym clothes I had brought with me instead of my regular clothes. I had a sweater on, you couldn't tell.
Oh boy. Excuse me. Oh my goodness. So now, let's talk about your writing more specifically, including the upcoming beautiful cover of A Poppy in Remembrance. That's going to be your 10th book. Is that correct?
I think it's my 9th book, yeah, but close, yeah.
Oh, okay, okay. A lot of them, some of them you wrote on your own, some of them you wrote as a compilation with other authors. But going back to that detailed oriented and you love stories, don't you?
Well, I enjoy them, and people like them, and they add a little bit of flair to your story. The 5 novellas I wrote for Barber were all inspirational historical romances. So that was all a piece of it. And then I wrote a Navy SEAL novel, which also had a romantic element to it. Partly it's the age of the people that you're writing about. I mean, when you're writing about someone in their 20s, they tend to be looking for romance, or romance happens in their life. That's not to say that it can't when you're older. It's just more prevalent, shall we say, then. So yeah, that's how those stories came about. And with A Poppy in Remembrance, Claire Meacham, my heroine, it's a coming of age story spiritually, emotionally, and professionally over the course of World War I. I think that age, 19 to 25, is just a fascinating age. People, we've gone through it 4 times with our children. They are learning who they are. They are making choices and decisions based on what they truly believe and what they don't believe. They're trying to figure out who they are as a professional. They're making mistakes, and yet they are bouncing back from those mistakes and changing direction. And that's what makes a coming of age story so much fun. Claire has a number of mistakes. So some of them were large. But she, by the end of the war, and she's living during a terrible time, it's come together in a way that she can live with. And that's what's most important, I think, when you're 24 and 25 years old. Can I, or even 60 years old, can I live with the decisions and choices that I've made? And
because she challenges her parents early on, doesn't she? Things that she's always done, and then she's like questioning those and wondering, is God really real, and what does that look like, and serious questions.
Well, in her case, Claire the book opens in London the day the war starts. Claire's father is a reporter, and she wants to be a foreign correspondent. Her parents think she wants to be a history teacher, but she's been learning shorthand on the sly, learning how to type. She's been studying languages and geography and history, so that when she lands in London in 1914, she understands the situation in Europe better than others. Her father begrudgingly takes her on as a stenographer, and over the course of her interactions with the copy boys, she has an invitation to go hear Oswald Chambers. She meets Oswald Chambers, actually, and Biddy Chambers, goes to their Bible training college and becomes a Christian there, much to the horror of her family. That was some of my story as well. My husband laughed when he read the book. It's like you're taking dictation between you and your father. Yeah, so I didn't see that when I was writing it. But again, you don't know the things of the past that come back and infuse your current or your future as well. She becomes a Christian. She tries to figure out how to become a journalist. Her father is very, very skeptical. She's a fan of Nellie Bly, so she's prepared herself. But there were very few, if any, female correspondents serving during World War I. So she was a woman ahead of her time, trying to figure it out. And she has, like any writer, makes mistakes. She assumes that she should be able to get her byline, but she isn't really ready. And we get to see places where her new sense of who God is gets in the way of her belief in her rightness and being able to write the story. And then there's the man element, which is there.
Shall we say?
And a guy do you want to marry? Which kind, or should you marry, or or who's right for me and who's wrong, and what is marriage? I mean, at one point she says to Biddy and her mother, she says, "Am I always going to be so torn between what he wants and what I want?" And the 2 women just start laughing. In my book, of course, who knows what really happened.
And once she meets the Chambers, now it takes a little while before you get into the book before she meets them. But once she meets them, they interact here and there. They step into her life and then out of her life, and all the way over to Cairo.
Well, her father decides that he's going to get her away from the Chambers, so he puts in a transfer, hoping to go to Paris or to even Berlin, though they don't really want to go to Berlin. And instead, because he had studied, here we go again, he had studied Arabic in school, they sent him to Cairo, which was just a nightmare for the family. The story takes place in England. It shifts to Cairo, and then Egypt, and then it ends in France. You get to be in Paris on the day the war ended, which was a really great day, and it was really fun to write that final scene or two of the book.
I like the way that you write. The detail oriented comes back. You give You paint such a vivid picture. I can smell the flowers. I can see the button shoes. I can feel the excitement of the crowd. It's just very well written. You don't need me to tell you that. I'm sure other people have told you that, many other people. But I can tell you, just as a woman on the street, it was very, very enjoyable to read. And I felt like I was learning both about the Chambers, about the war, and all surrounding this love story. It was fictional, but it was real.
Yes, and several people have said that reading this book shows them, because it's showing, not telling, shows them what it would be like to be a student of Oswald and Biddy Chambers. That's information that I gleaned while I was doing my research, on this book, but it came out in spades in Mrs. Oswald Chambers. After I wrote Mrs. O.C., I had to go back and make some corrections in A Poppy in Remembrance because I had done further research and I knew a little bit better how things went. But I read these books, review them, and I see people I know, or I feel like I know, and that's a homecoming in a way, and it's beautiful.
Nice. Now you started A Poppy in Remembrance before you went to Mrs. Oswald Chambers, and that's facts and figures and a story, another love story. Excuse me. So how did you if you hadn't yet engaged with them and fallen in love with them as the couple that they were, so dynamic, how did you start with the nugget for A Poppy in Remembrance?
Well, I knew that I knew that Oswald Chambers was going to be the major element in this book. My husband was on yet another business trip, and he went to Chicago, and the Oswald Chambers papers are located at Wheaton College. So I was able to go with him, and while he went to his conference, I went to Wheaton, and I spent a couple days. I just looked that time. I've been now twice. That time, I just looked at the World War I area, particularly pictures, because I had no idea what a YMCA hut in Cairo would look like. I mean, nothing to figure out from there. And I was able to scan and copy a lot of information, and I brought it home and then used it. As I indicated earlier to you, Patricia, I had 3 photos of Oswald Chambers' burial. So when I wrote that chapter in the book, I looked at those pictures back and forth. Because they are marquee characters, I felt a very strong need to make sure that I had them correctly written. I couldn't really play with words. I gave them dialogue, but it had to be dialogue that they would actually say. Mm-hmm. I think there are maybe 10 direct quotes out of My Utmost for His Highest in the book, but they're put within the context of dialogue. I also listened to a really wonderful series by Ken Boa, just a CD about the 16 major themes in My Utmost for His Highest, and I tried to incorporate those themes into this novel so that there may be some echo effect for people reading this book. So not only are Oswald Biddy there, but there's also some echoes of the things they've said. And Claire herself as a stenographer is taking down notes, and she appeals to her notes and letters with a friend and so forth. So we're never very far away. And it was really funny when I was getting the permissions from Discovery House to use those quotations. There was a letter that Biddy writes to Claire when Claire is in France, and I kept trying to find where I had gotten this letter. I mean, obviously, I thought I had altered a letter that Biddy wrote to someone else, but no, it turned out that I was so used to Biddy at that point. I wrote Biddy's letter myself. The letter.
Oh, okay, that's a perfect story right there. Let me check Facebook one more time, Michelle, see what we've got going on here. Janet McHenry says, what could writers today learn from the writing partnership of Oswald and Biddy? That's a great question.
Well, they were very much in tune with one another. I mean, they spent a lot of time together praying. Of course, they were married, but praying and working together. She took down everything he said when she sat in the back of every lecture he had over 7 years. That's why she had a lot of notes to turn into books. But later, when she's working on those books, she could hear his words in her ear. And at one point she said, I wish you could picture like I can sitting in that hut with the smell, well, maybe I said this, with the smell of the reeds and the sand under feet to remember the enthusiasm of the men who were there. So, when you're taking stenography, you're listening, you're seeing, you're writing it down. That's 3 of your 5 senses. And I think when you invoke all of those senses when you write and when you talk, then it makes it a little bit more, it can make it more powerful. Biddy and Oswald together, he saw her completely as a partner. He said, I wonder if the idea of me speaking and you writing it down kindles you as much as it kindles me. And we don't have anything. She never let us see what she responded to her husband, but she did it. So obviously she saw this as a methodology of spreading good news and an understanding of God that was different. The years after World War I were horrible. I mean, I've been thinking about writing a sequel to Poppy because, I mean, so much death. I mean, it wasn't just the end of the war. Then we had the Spanish flu, which killed 5% of the world's population. Yes. 5%, everybody in the world. Seances and attempts to meet with people and ghosts. You know, Arthur Conan Doyle was heavily involved with the movement to have those meetings where you listened for knocking, and that was yes and no. I mean, the world was in a terrible place during the war and after the war, just spiritually as well as materially and financially and physically for many, many men. So, people, not even men. So hard.
I think it needs to be said that it can appear to be that we've got two unique individuals, Oswald and Biddy, and they were so unique, and together they were so, a third level of uniqueness, and without taking anything away from what they did and who they were. Don't you think that we could all be that unique if we dare to follow like they followed Christ?
Well, yeah, I mean, you need to pay attention to what God is calling you to do. Just because he's calling me to do one thing doesn't mean that's the same thing that he's calling you to do. I mean, that's what we go through with our children as well. You need to find the gifts that God has put within you, because each of us has been given some sort of a gift, an ability, an insight. And that's what we bring to our writing, that my point of view is my point of view. It's completely different from yours or Janet's, for that matter, Janet McHenry's. And we see things differently. And so we bring to our observations different impulses, different philosophies even, and different ways of sensing and experiencing an opportunity.
And that was part of his plan all along, wasn't it?
I think so.
Oh, you have a story now on one of your other books. You had several other books, series. Let me see my notes here. I'm not saying them right this very minute, but I've got a whole page of here we are. Here we are. We have the Pioneer Christmas and the Bride's Christmas and the Summer Bride series and so forth. I saw a video or interview, and you were talking about a group of prostitutes and a pastor. And one prostitute was dying and actually died. What was that story, please?
Well, I was writing a Gold Rush Christmas, a part of the Pioneer Christmas collection, which is actually my favorite of my novellas. I had formed out the whole story. I mean, a novella is a really wonderful writing experience because, it's 20,000 words long. I'm a planner, so I plotted out the whole story, the way it needed to work. I had 10 chapters or whatever. And I was halfway through writing the book, but I was continuing to do research, and I do primary source research. And I happened upon a story of a pastor in Skagway, Alaska in 1898 who was called to minister to a prostitute who died. It was hard for him to do that. What would people say? But he did it anyway. And then they asked if they could have a funeral. They held a funeral in his church. What would people say? And he gave a wonderful altar call about Mary Magdalene being able to change your life. And then he needed a breather while they took the body out. So he went for a walk, and he met the steamship captain who said, hey, what's going on? He tells the story about all these women have decided they want to leave prostitution, but how can they leave prostitution because they can't get out? And he said, well, I've got an empty boat. I'm going back to Seattle tomorrow. They can come with me. And they will have no money. And the prospector next to him said, well, I've got money. I'll pay their way. And that's what happened. And they kept saying, but yet God kept moving. So the interesting thing about that story, that's a wonderful, true story that I was able to fit into a Gold Rush Christmas. But what also got interesting was, how do I fit that story into my book? And I had to make some rearrangements and some changes. Obviously, I'm changing words and simplifying. And that's when I became just so careful about word usage and word census. My editor, Jamie Clark Chavez, and I were counting every single word so that we could get them all into the 20,000 number. And we came out at like 19,997. And I said, I don't care. They can have the last three. Sometimes you just writer, you have to be just so persnickety and so very careful. Every sentence mattered. The number of words in every sentence was particularly important. And that's when I started using what I call a word census. My husband wrote a macro for me. So after I'm finished with a manuscript, I run this macro, and it tells me all the words I use in the order I use them in. So that's pretty amazing when you have 15,914 words, and you can, but it will show you them in order. So I always look at the top 10 to see if I've got particularly verbs. I want to make sure I'm using active, strong verbs. Mm-hmm. And if there's a verb of to be, is, was, whatever, I go back and I look at every single instance those words are used, and I look to strengthen those words, those verbs. It's really pretty funny, though. I wrote another a book called An Inconvenient Gamble, and in the top 10 was the word back. Why would back be in? And I reviewed and discovered I was saying things go back to instead of returned. I'm going back to do this, or I get to go back, or I got to go back. And that's sloppy language usage. So I looked at all, and some of the backs were correct. Horseback, I can't alter that. But when I went and looked at all those backs, I cut a number of words out, because to go back to is 4 words and return is only 1. Mm-hmm. And I do that now with all of my manuscripts. It took a long time on Poppy with 102,000 words long, but I think it strengthens the writing. It makes the sentences easier to read when you get rid of all those little words that are in the middle. And I think it cleans up the copy really, really well.
Mm-hmm. Mm. That is great stuff. Thank you very much. Let me see what we've got, if anything. Excuse me. Janice missed the title. If that's the title of, see, thank you. Janice, you're reading my mind. Janice is wondering, didn't you mention to me that you had a link to that? The title of the link.
Did I give you
this is the book cover, A Poppy in Remembrance. And so there's that title. And you had mentioned, did you mention to me that you had a suggested link for us to go and get that census count?
If you'd like to sign up for my newsletter, just go to the front page of my website, www.michelleewell.com. Well, you can see my spelling, 2 L's in Michelle, 1 in Ewell. And sign up for my newsletter. I can send you a link I can send you the information about the macro, and I'm happy to do that for free. No worries at all. You might, if you don't get it from me in the next couple of days, you might want to just send me contact information looking for the link, and I'm more than happy to share it.
Thank you so much.
It's a wonderful device. It's actually my favorite part about finishing the book, is then I get to run the macro and clean it and everything.
That's that detail-oriented coming back. We like clarity, don't we? We like to measure things. So let's talk about, you have a 4-part checklist for us. Before we get to that, you just mentioned about the census. That's one of the things. Then you had 3 other things that you were going to share with us. Something about weasel words. What are weasel words?
Weasel words are the words that we tend to overuse. You can Google weasel words or overused words on the internet, and it will give you a suggested list. But we each have our own personal weasel words, and those are words that again, clutter up the writing. I happen to have trouble with the word that. So one of the first things I always check, I just do a search for the word that in my manuscript, and I look at every single that, which sometimes is way too many. And if it's easy to kick it out, I just remove it right then. I'm better about it now because I've been so hyper aware of it for so long at this point. But you never really know. I found that I was using words that my mother used to use all the time, or word phrases that she used to use. My mother was Italian. Her native language was Sicilian. She grew up on a farm. I should have more. I mean, she got better. She spoke perfect English. She went to college, but she was a teacher. But those were tripping me up, because those were the words that came through my ear because I heard them growing up, and they only cluttered up the language. So sorry, Mom. Not echoing to this story right now.
Then you mentioned also double check your formatting and simplify your language.
Well, I take a look at actual page. So many people are just Google brains that we just can't read long passages. So like here is a page in this book. I don't know if you can even see it, but you'll notice just looking, you don't have to read the words. There's a lot of space on that page because my paragraphs are short. I personally write paragraphs 3, 4, 5 sentences long, and that is it. I mean, a 5-sentence paragraph is big for me. It's just because we have trained our brains inadvertently to read in bigger chunks or smaller chunks like that. It's hard for me, frankly, to read Dickens or Jane Austen because the paragraphs are so long. And I work hard at it when I do want to read a good book like that. But I look at the pages in a book and see, how does it look on my page? Is there wide space there? Is it easy for people to read? Do I need to have lengthy dialogue? And that, I think, eases things for the reader as they come along. That's worked for me. And those are all part of the checklist that I go through. It's a mental checklist. I don't have actually written down. But.
Yes. So let me review that one more time. You use a word census. And if we want to get that, viewers, we need to go to her website, michelleule.com. And I always put the links about everything above the video after every episode airs. So that will be there early on. Use the word census that she's providing for free. Find and change your own personal weasel words as well as the common weasel words. Double check your formatting and make sure that visually people can see what's on that page. There's white space so that their eyes don't tire. They don't lose their train of thought while they're reading. And then the last one was simplify your language. And she mentioned that even as she was talking about the word census. So I wonder if you have a bonus that you might suggest to us, how you plan your writing time. That would help some people.
How I plan my writing time? Well, I'd pray in the morning, Lord, here's my day, and this is what I see I need to finish by the end of the day. And I always say, and I'd like to be able to thank you at the end of the day. So I'm a list person, so I have a list of things to do. My list currently has 14 items on it, and I'm not going to finish them today. That is how I do it. Over the years, I've learned that I write best from 1 to 4 in the afternoon, maybe 1 to 5. Some of that may be because I was raising children, so I clear all my decks in the morning. I do all of my errands. I exercise in the morning. I go grocery shopping in the morning. And then it's almost invariably at 1 o'clock, I am at my desk and working on one thing or another. It's best if it's writing, but it hasn't been lately.
Well, pre-launch, you've got to give yourself some grace.
Yeah, you do. And, the marketing takes up a lot of time and keeping on tabs of things that you need to keep on tabs of. Right now I'm trying to write a lead magnet for people interested in my story, a story about Claire and her father, her grandfather, and her cousin at the 50th anniversary of Gettysburg, which comes up several times in the course of A Poppy in Remembrance. So I'm trying to write a prequel, if you will, just a short chapter, short story about what happened there and why that keeps echoing in A Poppy in Remembrance.
I love that marketing technique. That is a perfect way to draw people in. Not a lot of work. Tie back into your current marketing, what you're currently marketing. That's perfect. So before we leave, I'm wondering, tell me, please, and us, what's the significance of poppies? For A Poppy in Remembrance, there's a significance with poppies and World War I specifically. What is that?
Well, poppies come up several times in the course of this book. Poppies are a symbol of remembrance. They're generally red poppies, though there were blue ones in France as well. And poppies grow on a battlefield that's been churned up. I don't know if it causes them to reseed better, but poppies are usually an indicator that there's been a battle fired there. So a battle has occurred there. But it's a remembrance. Flowers throughout the story are used as a remembrance theme. One of the characters early on says, he gives her a posy and says, this is for you to remember. My mother used to always say that we need to give flowers as when we want to remember a day. In that case, it wasn't poppies because poppies don't last in a posy. But that theme comes up, flowers come up throughout the story. They're planted. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. They are specifically placed within the story so that there's resonance from beginning to end of themes. That's a thematic element that comes out throughout the book. There are other elements. Her father is always asking, what are your intentions? And the answer is always good. My intentions are good, until, of course,
they're not
even better or whatever, you know. But I think that I personally love that when I see those, like, what is this? I think Jim Rubart calls them Easter eggs throughout the story. They're references to other things that they cause an echo in the reader's mind that helps them appreciate and enjoy the story just a little bit more.
I was privileged to get a sneak peek, and I thoroughly enjoyed what I've seen so far. I haven't read absorbed the whole thing, but what I've read, I just it's rich. It's very rich. I'm drawn in immediately. I stay there. It's a good story. Good story.
That's the Holy Spirit at work, because, as I said, I was just led in the whole writing of this book, and I've been surprised by things I've seen, and I wrote the book.
Your life is richer as a result of being in the peripheral of Oswald and Biddy Chambers, and they're long dead.
Yeah, they are.
It speaks highly of them, doesn't it? And the Holy Spirit and God.
Well, truly, and such, O.C. was just such a character, and then Biddy honored him in such a way, and then God has blessed them, not just them, blessed all of us as a result of their sacrifice. Perhaps that's the better lesson from their lives is they never knew what was going to come of the words that Oswald spoke, the words that Biddy took down. There was just no indication that they would ever go more than just the people in the lecture hall.
Yes.
That God used them in ways that nobody could ever guess. And one of the most read blog posts on my blog post I've written on my website. I've written nearly 800 blog posts over the years. The most read one is, why did God allow Oswald Chambers to die so young? Because that's the question we all want to know. Why did he die at 43? He could have gone on. And yet my conclusion, and it was verified by one of their disciples or one of their students, was if Oswald hadn't died, Biddy never would have done the books. He had planned after the war to return to England, maybe run a Bible training college, tour and visit missionaries and encourage them in their work, which is a wonderful, wonderful job. But he wouldn't have reached as many people as he was able to do with the books. And My Utmost for His Highest, translated into 40 languages, it's been all over the world. They smuggled it into prisoner of war camps during World War II. And Brother Andrew, whom I got to exchange emails with when I was running Mrs. Oswald Chambers, he carried copies of My Utmost for His Highest through the Iron Curtain when he was smuggling Bibles during the Cold War. It goes everywhere, and it touches so many hearts in such excellent ways, and the glory all belongs to God. And who can argue with that?
Nobody else could have woven all of those different pieces together to make that beautiful picture. Thank you, Father. Thank you, Father. And thank you. Thank you, Miss Michelle Yule. It's so wonderful to talk to you. You've got so much energy. You have great stories. I'm guessing that everybody wants to sit and talk to you everywhere you go. They want to listen to you. We so appreciate your time. Let me check Facebook super quick before we get off. Janet says it's a great book. She highly recommends it. And she also says, for Michelle, advantages or disadvantages of writing biography versus fictional narratives. Can you take a moment to do that?
Yes, of course. I did it backwards. I wrote the novel first, and then I wrote the biography. And it was hard when I was writing the biography. I have to be absolutely truthful. How do I know this happened? I cannot put dialogue in their head. I did play with dialogue in a couple of places. I set a scene, maybe 3 or 4 times in the course of the novel just to put the story into context. But it was a total discipline to stay down on what was really true. And do I have a quotation from somewhere else? If I wrote narrative, I made sure I had proof of that within the context of all the research I had. I spent a week at Wheaton College when I was working on Biddy. I returned with a scanner, and all I did for an entire week was scan documents. And then my scanner died on day 2. I had to go buy another scanner. So I have thick files of documentation for everything I wrote, but that was the challenge, was to remain disciplined to what do I know to be absolutely true and not was in the novel, because the novel was a novel. It wasn't truth.
That's a great question. Great question and a great answer. Thank you so much for that. All right, this brings to a conclusion. Unfortunately, brings to this interview to a conclusion. This has been Marketers on a Mission, episode 128, How to Fine-Tune Your Manuscript Before Submitting It to Your Editor, with guest author Michelle Ewell. Thank you so much again, Michelle, for being here with us. Thank you, viewers, for joining us. Tomorrow we have another guest, writer John L. Moore. He's going to teach us how to create atmosphere and write with authority. It's going to be a great teaching session. You know, we're here every weekday at 12 Pacific, 3 Eastern. Why? This program is designed to serve you, to help you learn the craft of writing point by point from professional writers, and to teach you about online marketing, because it is the communication tool of the future. Like missionaries of old, we must go into these unknown territories to share the good news. It's challenging, but you can do every single thing that God called you to do, and He will make it so. Thank you, Father. Thank you for being here. I'm Patricia Durgan and Michelle Ewell. We'll see you tomorrow.